You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Monday. We are back finally. Week off, but we are back to doing the thing, right? Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. We vow to try to make that a thing again. And as we come back, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk overarching college football themes. We're going to do it with the man to my left here. If you're watching on video, that's Mackey Award-winning tight end Jake Butt. Jake, super excited to talk grander college football stuff with you, man.
We can never get enough of it, but Isaiah, we can never get enough of that shirt either, man. You're looking very dapper. Looks like you just got a haircut too. You look sharp.
Thank you, man. It's just, it's tropical feeling outside. It's 72 and sunny. So I figured I'd break out clothes that I had stationed away for the Florida trip that didn't happen a couple weeks ago. So this is a little secret. This is actually a Moana shirt. The Disney movie Moana.
Got it.
I don't know. You can't really see, but like there's a little Moana like here where it's white and what have you. So
nice.
Probably can't see it on video. But nonetheless, let's not talk about my sartorial choices. People, for whatever reason, get all up in arms about that. I don't know why, but they, when I wear a hat or do something, there's always a bunch of comments about the way I'm dressed. So let's just skip all that. Let's get into, we have a big college football season coming up. So I want to let you kind of delve into the things that are the big issues that we're going to be seeing. Let's start with just the general changing landscape. We have all kinds of weird stuff that's been happening out in the college football stratosphere. Certainly things look like they could change as far as potentially with NIL and all these other things. We're seeing some kinds of weird kind of almost tampering type stuff, but let's delve into the issues as far as what do you think is the number one thing that we need to look at when it comes to college football in 2022?
I mean, it's hard, because you have different categories, and this NIL and transfer portal is kind of in a category of its own. And whether you want to look at it or not, it's going to be in your face. Your favorite team might lose one of your best players to another school that's just willing to offer them more money. But as I look at NIL, and I was a big advocate of this in my playing time, guys should be able to monetize their fair market value based on their on-field performance. And that is a good part of NIL and should be the case. But that's not what we're seeing in today's world. Even Jordan Addison, the Pitt receiver that USC decided to offer $2 million. That's actually fair market value. I'm okay with that in that instance. I think he proved it, being the Blitnikoff Award winner. He proved that he is a worth $2 million to a school, especially a school like USC with that level of brand power. What I kind of have an issue with is the recruiting aspect of this, where you're paying for high school players that are essentially unproven and giving them millions and millions of dollars before they've proved they're worth that. The perfect example is Ohio State recruit, 5-star coming out of Texas. He gets offered $1 million, stays there for a year, and then transfers back to Texas. That's not what NIL was for. Okay, so I think actions always follow incentives. So when you're incentivizing high school recruits to just take the most money possible, that's going to have some damaging effects. But when you incentivize good on-field performance at the college level, that could actually benefit people. So I'm all for current players earning their fair market value. Fair market value is the key word. I think it's kind of taken some legs of its own. We'll see where the dust settles here in a couple of years.
I agree with everything except for one point. And I think the only point that I disagree with you on is while I do agree in the sense of Jordan Addison deserving, his market value, I don't like the tampering aspect, right? Like it didn't see, he wasn't in the transfer portal, he is now, but USC, seeming to come calling and saying, hey, you transfer to us, we'll get you this type of money in NIL. That seems like a bridge too far to me personally. I don't know what you think about that aspect when it
Let
comes.
me touch on it.
Mm-hmm.
So just as you're saying this, another big story in college football is the coaching carousel. And Brian Kelly leaves Notre Dame to go down to LSU. Lincoln Riley leaves Oklahoma to go out to LA with USC. That's tampering. They were talking to them in the middle of the season last year. In Brian Kelly's case, had some things fallen differently, Notre Dame would have been in the college football playoff. And he bounced out of town and went down to LSU, and no one was screaming tampering. They were all saying, wow, $100 million, great hire for LSU, great get for USC. Those guys were set before the $100 million. These college athletes, this might be their prime earning years. So for them, I would like to have an equal standard. And if the coaches can do it, then the players can do it too. That's just the fair standard of the world we live in today.
Well, I think the only thing is they've got to figure out a way to make that fair, because if that ends up being the law of the land, and I do agree with that sentiment, the idea that if the coaches can do it, then the players can do it too. But then the schools with the bigger coffers and the ones that might be willing to skirt rules, because that's the thing about Michigan, right? Michigan isn't going to do stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not going to. What happens if you do get in, not a legacy guy like Will Johnson, but Michigan didn't bring in Josh Connerly, for instance. He ended up going to Oregon, but the 5-star offensive tackle, say he ended up coming to Michigan. He doesn't have like ties to the school. It would be really easy for like a USC or an Alabama that is going to be willing to skirt some rules a little bit to say, hey, what is it going to cost for you to leave there and come to our school? That's where things start to get a little bit murky, in my opinion. But I just think that there needs to be some kind of regulation. Now, like you mentioned, there's all kinds of new coaches across college football. It seems like that the Lincoln Riley and he particularly at USC has been getting a lot of publicity. A lot of people think that they're going to suddenly turn the corner kind of overnight. But what are your thoughts about each guy, each of these big name hires? You touched on a couple of them, but like, what do you think the chances are that they're able to turn things around? What are your thoughts on the general kind of new faces at big schools scenario that we're seeing across the sport right now?
I would say that the most dangerous place you could be, especially at big brand schools like LSU and USC, is where you're kind of caught in limbo. You're making hires that you think could be good coaches, but ultimately they're not slam dunks. They're not home runs where you actually have a chance to compete up to your standards. So for both of these schools, of course, the price tag was 9 figures, $100 million. It's extremely expensive, but you don't have a chance otherwise. You have to go out there and get that level of coach. And we could start with USC. I think this was a slam dunk hire. I think Lincoln Riley fits the exact brand of what USC is. I've seen some videos and everything's recruiting, everything's media. Like you touched on the fact that he's in the press right now, but he's also driving recruits around in his Rolls Royce and they're showing up to his 8-figure house. That's got that staying power where you're like, okay. And you get the LA sun, the beautiful landscape. It's USC. You see some very famous, popular athletes on the wall of the building. That's going to feed this beast that is USC recruiting for a very long time. And then in terms of overnight, I don't know that USC will finish, competing for a college football playoff this year, but I think they made huge leaps. They had the #1 transfer portal class in the entire country. And now you used to just have your recruiting class and that's it. Now they're ranking transfer portal classes. You go out and you get Caleb Williams, who now you have your quarterback solidified for at least a couple of years. That's the most important position in football. So you combine that with some returning starters, other additions in the transfer portal, and you feel really, really good that USC is going to have a chance here to compete, maybe, but definitely in the next 2, 3, 4 years, they should be competing for a national championship. LSU, on the other hand, while I do like the hire, I think Brian Kelly is an excellent football coach. He's proved that everywhere he's been. I think he's got more of an uphill battle. It's a lot different going through the SEC and playing Bama, Texas A&M, Florida, now Tennessee. There's a number of schools rather than playing in the Pac-12. I think the road to excellence in the college football, Georgia, can't believe I forgot them. The road to excellence in the SEC is going to be a lot more difficult than Pac-12. And then as well as that, is Brian Kelly The biggest problem for LSU, other than the Joe Burrow year, has been who is going to be your quarterback. Bama has that figured out. Ohio State has that figured out. USC has that figured out. Georgia, to an extent, has, a few options that they're confident in, as well as other good players. LSU, you don't have your quarterback figured out. So I think this is going to take a little bit more time. They essentially have unlimited resources down there. They will be able to feed into recruiting. And I think Brian Kelly will have a chance to compete and make it at least harder on the other teams. But the road to success there in LSU is going to be a lot harder.
Well, I definitely want to touch on some of the other broader aspects of college football, things that we need to be on the lookout for. But before we move on, I just want to, can you touch real quick on your thoughts on some of those guys that came in to replace some of those other guys? Obviously Brett Venables being at Oklahoma, and Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. Do you have any thoughts about how they fit in, just real fast?
I would look at Notre Dame, and I think just from talking to other people in this space, is Notre Dame feels like they got a home run hire again in Marcus Freeman. And this was a guy, I heard stories about him when he was just a GA, a graduate assistant, and he had an uphill battle from there. There's a lot of graduate assistants out there, but very few go on to become head coaches. People that knew him at that point in time said, okay, this guy's different. He's going to be a head coach one day. So obviously Notre Dame felt the same way about him. I think bringing him in was a great hire. And I think you can kind of see the immediate, press that he's getting, which is important, because today it's all about recruiting today. So if you're going to have a top recruiting class, you need to be on social media. You need to be in the press in a good light. Their spring game this year was phenomenal, bringing back all their former players. That's just great for the program. Brady Quinn starting the Notre Dame NIL initiative, great jump for them. I think that program is going to be in a healthy place for a very, very long time. But as a first-year head coach, though I do like the hire, it's going to take some time for him to prove it and establish himself as one of the best coaches in the country. Oklahoma, on the other hand, it's the same thing. It's a school that has unlimited resources. They really have that brand power and that recognition, but it's going to, again, you lose Caleb Williams, you're losing some of your top players. You have to have an ability to replace that. And I haven't necessarily felt the same confidence that they'll be able to replace the talent that they're missing as some other schools.
All right. Well, let's continue talking about the overarching things going on in college football. But before we move on, I do have to tell you a little something about Built Bar. You all know how much I love Built Bar. If you don't know what it is, it's a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It is high in protein, low in calories, low in carbs. That means that you can have two at a time, and they're like 130 calories each and 20 grams of protein. You can have two and make it a meal replacement. And trust me, when you taste how delicious they are, you'll want to. I do it all the time. I put my money where my mouth is. I've spent quite a bit on my own, buying dozens and dozens of boxes from Built Bar. So join me by going to built.com using the promo code LOCK15. That's built.com, promo code LOCK15. You get 15% off of your next order of Built Bar. All right, Jake. So let's continue on. Let's discuss just some of these other things that you have keyed in on as being overarching topics in what we need to look forward to in 2022 as far as college football is concerned. So I'm just going to tee you right up and just say, like, literally, what is the next thing that you're looking at when you're breaking down the big overarching storylines? What is the next thing that you have in your mind when it comes to the college football landscape?
Say twofold is you have the two conferences that have really been, I would say, majority dominant in college football. Is you have the SEC and the Big Ten. And I think the SEC is going to run through the same teams as it did last year. It's going to be Alabama and it's going to be Georgia. Who's going to be the favorite to come out of that? Even though Georgia finally gets over the leap, Kirby Smart finally beats his colleague, Nick Saban. I think that was a big step for their program, but it's going to be hard for them to replace. They had 15 guys taken in the NFL draft this year. That's a record. They were just continuing to set records in the NFL draft this year. It's hard to replace that, even though you have 4 or 5-star recruits. Not all of them go on to become NFL caliber players. So they're focusing now on replacing and plugging in new guys. Alabama, on the other hand, while they are replacing guys, they returned their two best players and arguably the two best players on their respective sides of the ball. Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young. Okay, you got him back. Your quarterback position is solidified. Again, you need a quarterback to win in this league or in college football. They got their guy. And then on the defensive side of the ball, one of the most important positions is the antidote for a good quarterback is, do you have a guy that can create and generate pressure? And that's Will Anderson Jr., who some people think he might be a Heisman winner this year coming on the defensive side of the ball. So Bama has, while they are replacing talent, they have their best player on offense back, their best player on defense back, and those two guys might be the best at their respective positions in all of college football. So coming out of the SEC, I mean, is this earth-shattering news? Is this breaking news? Not at all. But I would say Alabama is probably the favorite to come out of there. Now you got the Big Ten Conference. I think it's going to run through, historically how it's ran through is Ohio State and Michigan. Okay. Now Michigan has its own challenges. While you are returning everybody on offense, essentially, other than Hassan Haskins, you're returning a majority portion of your offense. So for the first time in a very long time, Michigan is most confident about their offensive side of the ball, but you're replacing your coordinators. I thought Josh Gaddis had his best year last year, and you saw the value that brought to the team as a whole. The Michigan offense was explosive. They were putting up points. They were able to attack you in a number of different ways. Now you have two new guys coming in, whether it's Sharon Moore, the O-line coach, becoming the run game coordinator, or Matt Weiss, the quarterback's coach, being the pass game coordinator. That's a challenge. These guys are first-year coordinators. We will see how they come, but this is the thing about the importance of having good quality coordinators is you can have all of the talent in the world, but your coordinator is the guy that gels it all together. So if you have an offensive coordinator that's extremely successful at Stanford, but they're running a pro style, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs, personnel, and they're establishing themselves in the Pac-12, and then he goes to Ohio State and tries to implement that same system, you're going to see Ohio State take a massive dip because that's not their DNA. That's not the players they have. They are going to be an air raid, pass first, explosive offense. So having the right coordinator that understands the talent he has at hand, the flow within the game and how to call complementary plays is extremely important. And, these guys are in their first year. We're going to have to see how they adapt. Ohio State, on the other hand, you're returning in Michigan. Who's going to be your quarterback? You have 2 good options, but that's something that you want to have solidified as early as possible. Ohio State, you have your guy, CJ Stroud, who, again, another guy that should be in those top 3 or 4 favorites to compete for a Heisman this year. He's back, and Jackson Smith and Jigba's back, who will probably compete for the Blitnikoff as well. So they have offensive pieces. I'm not worried about them replacing their receivers because they seemingly just have loads and loads of them every single year, just carbon copies of one another that are explosive, wiry, fast, have really good hands. They understand the nuances of the receiver position. Now they got a guy that can get them the ball. Their problem was never offense. It was defense. And we saw that in nothing more. I mean, the Rose Bowl, they gave up a lot of points. The Michigan game especially was very uncharacteristic of an Ohio State defense. Ryan Day identified it wasn't good enough. He went out and got Oklahoma State's defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles. And, typically I wouldn't say that, I would ever be looking for a defensive coordinator from the Big 12 just because they give up a lot of points out there. But in this case, I would say Jim Knowles is actually a really good hire. He was able to generate a lot of pressure last year. He was able to make offenses uncomfortable, and he has that experience and that name power that's going to come in and demand respect from an Ohio State defense. So for him to come in, they have talent. They're Ohio State. They're always going to have talent, but you need the leadership. You need the painter to take all of the different colors of paint and eventually make art. That's the coordinator. So Jim Knowles comes in, and I think he'll be a big step forward for the Buckeyes.
Now, we'll just touch on that for just one quick second, because obviously this being Locked On Wolverines, that's the thing that people are going to be paying its most attention to is this rivalry, because I do agree with you that chances are whoever wins that game is going to be the representative for the Big Ten, at least the Big Ten East going into the Big Ten championship game, because we'll see how things play out with Iowa and Wisconsin, but it still, to me, seems like it's these two teams. Certainly Penn State and Michigan State will have their say. But that said, How fast do you think, as someone who's played the game, how fast do you think that someone like Jim Knowles can make an immediate impact on the defensive side of the ball? Because obviously Ohio State's really going to need to figure something out given Michigan's offense, assuming that Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss can just pick up and run with what Gaddis had kind of started and move things forward. How challenging do you think it's going to be for him to be able to get to the point where he can stop Michigan's offense?
The right coach in the right situation should be able to succeed immediately. So Ohio State has all of the talent, and the majority of Ohio State's schedule is going to be games that they could win with anyone defensive coordinator as their defensive coordinator, so they'll have plenty of times to figure this out. You hire a guy like this and you bring in your talent for the tougher games. They have Notre Dame to open the season, obviously Michigan. There's obviously a number of games in there that are going to be challenging, but the right coordinator should be able to make an immediate impact. And I'll tell you this I remember my first 2 years at Michigan, we were 7-6 and 5-7. We did not have good offenses at all, but we had a lot of talent. The majority, I think we had maybe 10 plus guys on our offensive team my freshman year in 2013 that went on to be NFL players. We were horrible. Same with my sophomore year. We were horrible. We come in my junior year and my senior year with 2 new offensive coordinators, and a flip was switched immediately. We would go days on end in my first 2 years where the defense would just dominate us and we had no answer. And it was truly a helpless feeling. Then my last 2 years, when we have some improved coordinators, we were able to compete a little bit better. The practices became, more back and forth rather than one truly lopsided. So the right guy in the right situation should bring immediate relief. And frankly, I didn't think the Ohio State defense looked very good at all last year. They probably played right at their floor for the level of talent they had. I think bringing in the right guy with the right scheme should improve it overnight.
Well, that's certainly not what Michigan fans are going to want to hear. But the good news is that they do have that start. They have that, and obviously the idea that a lot of these Ohio State guys haven't beaten Michigan, and so they don't know what that's like. And all these Michigan guys, not all of them, but a lot of them don't know what it's like to lose to Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We're going to continue talking college football overarching themes with Jake Butt, the Mackey Award-winning Michigan tight end. But before we do, I do have to tell you a little something about our partners at BetOnline, who continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's finish out. We've got a few more minutes, a few more topics to get into. So, Jake, let's continue to break it down. What do you think is the next thing when you're looking at the breadth of college football? What's the next thing on your mind as far as themes that we need to be paying attention to from a grand scale?
It may not be this year, but I would just say college football as an entire landscape is changing. As you can kind of see this playing out. It started with the implementation of the college football playoffs. Some people were against that. Now you're seeing 4 teams. I think the big thing is this going to expand anymore? Are we going to start to see 8 teams or 12 teams or even 16 teams? And I think it's all just this summed up bucket is now you have NIL. Now you have the transfer portal, the potential talk of an expanded college football playoff. I think these kind of changes take a long time to play out, but if you could kind of recognize them earlier, you can kind of see the incentives to expand these playoffs. And the big thing is guys are sitting out of bowl games if they're not competing for a national championship. That's not good for TV. That's not good for advertisers, and that's not good for college football as a whole. You need your best players playing. It's a TV product. So you need the top players that are going to draw the most viewers. So how do you do that? Well, you have to incentivize more guys to play. Well, how do you do that? You expand college football playoff. You give guys something to play for. No one's sitting out of March Madness, because everyone has a chance to go compete for that national championship. College football should consider doing the same. And I think fans want to see competitive games. So if you expand the college football playoffs, that's going to actually draw more audience. And then now you're talking NIL, you could have some more disposable money to incentivize guys even further to continue playing and competing at a high level for their schools. So at the end of the day, I want to see a good product. I want to see good games. I like to watch Ohio State play Michigan and Ohio State to play Michigan State and Penn State, not Bowling Green or Akron. I like Michigan to play in those games, not, some team from, the East Coast that we've never heard of before. So what you would hope for is more competitive games, more on the line in these competitive games. That means the more of the top players and top coaches will continue to stay and play and compete in these games. I think that'd be good for college football as a whole.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I hate that there's, thankfully for the most part, teams like Ohio State and Michigan tend to schedule some types of non-conference games that we don't necessarily see a lot of the SEC type schedule. Michigan this year, it's not that great. Obviously, with 3 games that they should easily take, in starting with the Colorado State game to start out the year. But like you look at Ohio State, for instance, they've got Notre Dame to start off the season. When you look at the futures of both teams, I believe both of them play Texas and Oklahoma, and Washington still on the docket for Michigan. I think even Ohio State might even have a series with them. They have Alabama on the books. Michigan's, they've got all those same ones for the most part. But then yet you look at a lot of the other teams in the SEC and such, it doesn't have that. They tend to play an FCS team somewhere in the, middle to end of the season.
Yeah.
So I do agree that there is kind of a separation of powers to some degree when it comes to the haves and the have-nots. And I think that teams like Michigan and Ohio State should continue to schedule tougher games. And I think that the SEC should, maybe come up north every now and again. Kudos to Auburn for going to Penn State last year, and then they're going to host Penn State this year. But I think that I'm with you. I want to see good games. And as much as you like the automatic wins, wouldn't it in this year, it might be good for Michigan to be able to potentially rattle off 11 wins before it gets to that Ohio State game. But wouldn't you rather be in a situation where, it wasn't that, they played 11 teams that, maybe weren't that good. And then we'll find out in that last regular season game how good this team is.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you rather go get to that game and be like, man, they took down so many good teams to get here, and that's the undisputed better team.
Yeah.
But then if you got also an expanded playoff, you have a situation where, hey, they still got to keep their guard up because they could lose at any point.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about college football.
Yeah.
All right, Jake, any other thoughts that you have before we move this thing along?
I would just say, just to comment on what you just mentioned is, right now there's incentive to try to get layups in the out of conference game. It just is what it is, because you could really only afford one loss at a max for most teams to still sneak into the college football playoff when it's 4 teams. If you expand it, now you can incentivize teams to play better and better. You can lose a game or 2 and still get into the playoffs if you have a 8 or 12 team playoff. So why is the NFL the best product in the world? Because every single week is competitive. Every single game could go either way. And then you get into playoffs, and it truly is that single elimination brings out the best in everybody. So maybe college football could take a page out of that notebook and start to generate better TV deals, more revenue, more competitive games by, switching up the structure of how we're currently doing it.
All right. Well, we are out of time here today, but that's going to do it. Some really good stuff, Jake, and doing a little bit, some different types of things, but we went not necessarily Michigan centric here, though we
can never get enough of college football. Why not?
Exactly.
Let's keep talking about it.
Exactly. So that for the Mackey Award-winning tight end, Jake Butt, I am Isaiah Hole. We will talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching and or listening. Peace.